But great. So today is part 2 of live coding an Express server. We're kind of building it from the ground up. We'll take some pit stops along the way to talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it. And one thing in particular I want us to check in on today is HTTP anatomy. So this is one thing that I was talking with Puneet earlier this week, and he was saying this is one of those things that is falling through the cracks a little bit in P2, like people in the P3 interviews aren't having a really solid understanding of request, response, headers, bodies, you know, who's doing what. And so we're going to cover that as we go. But great, so this is our Express server. Last time we built the server, we talked about how to configure the port. We talked about what middleware is and gave some definitions. We talked about the ES6 destructuring syntax, and then we created a get route. And that get route, I'll make this a little bigger here. So this is our get route, where we send back a repeated word. And so for today, moving my screen here. So for today, what I wanted to do is we'll do another example getting URL parameters. So this is something that you want to be really solid on, is how to get query parameters and URL parameters. And then we'll implement a post route. So this is get, we'll do a post route. We'll talk about when you might be doing that. And then depending on time, we'll get to the SQL backend and just keep going until we run out of things to talk about. Sound good?
This is great, yeah.
Cool. So to get us back into it, let me pull up the terminal. And we're in the right folder? No. And 27. So what is that doing there? That's odd. All right. So we were running this with Nodejs server JS. So, oh, great. App crashed. Oh, yeah. Already have a server running. Let's try that again. Okay, server listening on port 3000.
Real quick question.
What's that?
So I've seen a lot of Express tutorials that have you do kind of what Express suggests and do like like you set up an environment variable, it seems like, for a debugging mode, and then you run it through like NPM start to get more information. And it seems like Nodejs gives you a lot of the same information. Do you know if there's a particular advantage to doing it that like first way, or?
Let me see if I get what you're saying. So when you're developing apps, oftentimes you will have different environments. So it'd be a development environment and a production environment. You could have a staging environment, which is like production, but it's, you know, mimics production in many ways, but it isn't the live version. And so one of the things that you can do is, if you know you're in development mode, you can share errors and debugging information that you wouldn't otherwise share in production. And so to access that, you know, there's no one way to do that, but what you might do is you could do const node and equals process. What is it? Process.end.node and And so node env is the kind of standard for Node of specifying your environment. And this is by default development. And so then you can check, you can say if node env triple equals development, I think it's like this, then log some errors or something like that.
So it's not so much the switching of the environment that I'm confused about. It's the actual output that I'm wondering if there's any difference between that switching the environment and then using NPM start to start the server, which seems to give me the same information as running a node mod. Because I'm currently in my development environment right now. I'm set for development mode. I was just curious if there was a particular reason or any more, I guess, important information that would be shown via that NPM start method as opposed to node mod.
Right. So good question. NPM start is an NPM script. Who's pretty clear on what NPM scripts are? James, a couple. Okay. So NPM scripts would be in your package.json file, and it's a script that you can run. So it's some command line commands that you can run given a certain, so you say like NPM run test. What that looks like here is, I think it's scripts. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. And then test. And then you can say Mocha, for example. So when you're doing NPM start, that's a shortcut. That's like a shortcut to a script. And that script could say node server.js, or it could say nodemon server.js, or it could say any number of other things. So,
okay.
So it'd be good.
Looking at the script, I think I kind of get it now.
Yeah. What is your NPM start?
This one is having node run the entry point to the application, which in this case for this particular one is bin www, which would be the app entry point. So it seems like then that either of those methods will give me the same information then.
Yeah, and the important thing is just to see what is NPM start running, right?
And then, so I guess the last thing is running that via node. Is there, I guess, a quick explanation as to how that would be different than running nodemon from inside of that directory?
I don't see a difference based on what you're saying. Nodemon's basic purpose is run node, and if I detect a change in the files, restart node, right? So there shouldn't really be much of a difference, but if you still have a question about it, I can check it out afterwards, and we can. Cool. Yeah, so on that point, let's write a script in our package.json file. This will be start to start our server. And the command here, let's do nodemon server.js. So then when we go out to the command line, we should be able to do npm run start. And it says no. So package.json files can be pretty picky about some things. And one of the things it's being picky about right now is that this had spaces in it, I think is the problem. So let me try this again. There we go. So I ran that command nodemon server.js. Is there anything else? Oh, and so with NPM Run, as I understand it, NPM will, so there are a handful of NPM commands, NPM init, NPM install, all of that. If NPM doesn't find the command in their own list of commands, it will look in your scripts. And so what I mean by that is I think you can just run npm start. So you can skip the npm run start. And that's true of most things when there isn't already an npm command defined for it. Does that make sense? So npm start, npm test, those are all a shortcut for npm run start, npm run test. All right, so we got the server running, and let's just test this route. So we're doing a get route. This is Pushman, and it's localhost. We're at port 3000, and it's repeat, and I'm going to send it howdy. And so this is now a URL parameter. If we were to do something like this, which we'll do this in a minute, what would we say? Number of times equals 5. That would be a query parameter. So these are different parts of the URL, different ways to pass parameters into your route. In this case, we've defined as a URL parameter. This is a query parameter. Are folks pretty confident on the HTTP anatomy, URL anatomy, stuff like this? This is pretty clear. Because this is one of those things for P3 that you want down pat. You want to be able to say, yeah, so this is the, this is the domain, and this is my route, and this is the query parameters, and this is the, you have to be able to define all those things. So this should give us back howdy, howdy. Great. So that's what we did up until up through the end of our time on Wednesday. And yeah. So why did I use Postman? Postman is a easy way to make many different kinds of HTTP requests to a server. What we could do, and I wonder if this is what you're asking about, Theo. We could, from a browser, do the same thing, right? So we could do what was it? Localhost 3000, repeat, big howdy. Yeah, and so in this case, the response that it's giving us, it's asking us to download it. And I think that's because we haven't specified, or it's because of the way that we've specified the content type. So your browser, based on different content types, will do different things. If it's got something coming back that's content type application zip, maybe, like a zip file, it will know to download that rather than try to display the thing in your browser window. So the content type here is application text. And I think for the browser, and this is just a guess, I think for the browser, the ones that it will display in the browser window are, what is the HTML one? What's that?
Isn't it like a text plain?
Yeah, or HTML is the other one. I'm trying to remember what the response header on this was.
I think if you go to body, it's where they have all the different things.
Right. So this one is text HTML, and that would be one that the browser knows to display. Cool. So we'll set that back to application text. Next up, so you were asking about the difference between query parameters and URL parameters. Who knows what that difference is?
I know, at least behavior-wise, your URL parameter is going to exist there in the URL, and that's going to help in routing. with query parameters, it's actually going to be available as a variable for you to use and express. And that's to add to that.
Yes and no. So the URL that when you're building a server, the URL is a pretty flexible thing. You can get information from it in a couple different ways. So a URL parameter is when we are getting a variable, we're getting some data from the URL path itself, right? And so in this example, in the URL path, after repeat, we've got a word, you know, and we could change, this is a variable name, we could change this to whatever we want. But you can also get information, or you can get data from these query parameters. So query parameters would be anything that follows this question mark. And I'm sure you've seen this in URLs. You know, if you go to Google, Google sends the query that you've typed in plus a bunch of other information through query parameters. So if we go to Google and we say, help, I'm stuck with Node. So now Google uses this search route for them, you know, implementing it on the back end. They've implemented this search route. And then everything else is a query parameter because it follows this question mark. So source HP, we don't know what HP is, but this is, you know, something they've defined. And here's Q, which is what they use for query, and help, I'm stuck with Node, right? And there's, you know, lots more information that they put in here, maybe something about your location or, you know, whatever it may be. That makes sense?
Yeah, I see that there, but I don't understand what the difference is. They're both being passed in. They're both literally the values you're using, right? Like URL parameter, that word, whatever argument you supply in the address bar, you're getting that word. And query parameter is the same thing.
Yeah, you're right. So the bottom line is you can use either to take in some variable, something for your route that may change from you know, from request to request. And there's no right or wrong way to do this, but oftentimes when you're so for example, one of the things you'll be doing, I think we do it in P2 and you'll be doing it a lot more in P3, is building a REST API, right? And so when you're building a REST API, a lot of times what you want to do is use the URL parameters, because you're defining resources, you're defining endpoints. And let me just say this. So if you're defining resources or defining endpoints, it tends to be a little bit more readable and a little bit more logical to use URL parameters. So you might have, who would it be? Like users, and then you could follow it with some user ID, for example. When you're doing an API, query parameters are useful for like options. So one, you know, you could have an option that's like return JSON, or you could have an option that's return XML, right? So there's no reason it has to be one or the other, but query parameters tend to be used in APIs for options and kind of extra information, and then the URL parameters or the route is to specify like a resource, to point to a resource. Yeah, Sabrina.
Just to clarify, the URL parameter always has the colon, and then the query has the.
Say that again.
I just wanted to clarify, like when you're doing URL parameter, you use colon for whatever it is you want, and when you're doing a query, you use equals. Right? That's the difference in visually how they do it.
So there are two different things going on here. There's the how you implement it on the Express backend, and then there's what the standard is for how a URL looks in any case, whether or not you're using Express like in a browser. So URL parameters excuse me, query parameters in a URL are always going to look like you've got, you know, google.com/search. So this is part of the route, and for them it could be a URL parameter that they've got. And then query parameters are always going to look like this. So I'm wondering if this is what you're getting at. It's separated by this question mark, and then it's these key value pairs of, you know, query equals something. And why am I spacing right now on what the separator is? What's the separator between? Yeah, that's right. So query equals something, ampersand, you know, language equals English, US, right?
That's the big difference. There's one's key value for value.
Sure. Yep. Yep. So, Sabrin, to your question, this syntax is universal to URLs, and it doesn't have anything to do with Express. The colon syntax, like this is in Express how we specify that something is a variable rather than a fixed thing. So what this says is, after repeat, take whatever is next in that route and put it in the word variable, right?
I thought like when you were like, sometimes like when you want to do like addition or whatever it is you want to do on a URL, and you use this exact syntax, I thought that was like, I didn't realize that was specific to Express.
Mm-hmm. Yep. This is the way in Express routing that you delineate between something that's a fixed part of the route and something that's a URL parameter. Right? Good so far? So let's go ahead and implement a post route. Let me see if I missed anything that I wanted to cover. Yeah, so let's do a post route. In what context would we use a post route?
Sending information to the server.
Okay, say more about that.
Like if there's a form data or something information that the client, that whatever the user agent is sending to the server instead of just requesting.
Yeah, so it's when you are sending something to the server, but there's something very a very important distinction, which is when you're sending something to the server and you need a body, right? Because post requests always have a body to them. GET requests do not. And you can, so what you were mentioning is exactly right. A form, like an HTML form, you can use a post method to send that form data to your server, right? You can also use a GET method to send that same form data to the server. And so instead of sending it in the body of the request, the data would actually be up here. Like if you filled out a form and it had name, and it had age, and it had, you know, other stuff like that. So when you're using an HTML form, you'll make that decision. Do I want to use GET or POST? And the difference is, does the information that I've typed in or that the user is typing in, is it going to be sent as query parameters, or is it going to be sent in the body of a POST request? Right?
Is it generally, I'm guessing that it's accepted practice that you do your
forms as posts so that you don't see what's in the URL?
Yeah, so you can, some people will choose to do a form as a post so that the information that's typed in isn't kind of readily visible, but it doesn't provide really any security, because there's nothing inherently secure about the body of a post request except that you can't see it quite as easily in the browser. Why would you choose one over the other? Who has an idea of why you would choose one versus the other? Get versus post, yeah.
Get you are requesting something from the server, and with post you are sending information to the server.
I want to nuance what you're saying. So you were saying with get you're requesting something, and with post you're sending something. All of them are types of requests. So get is a type of request, post is a type of request, put is a type of request, delete is a type of request, right? And these correspond to, these are HTTP methods: get, post, put, patch, delete. These other ones are not common. You will not see these almost ever, but these first 5 here. And they're all types of requests. It's just that with a post request, you have this option to send this additional data where you're sending this additional data that's relevant to your request, right?
So it's not the request itself, but it's like little extras with it, in a way.
So what I'm trying to say is it is the request itself, okay, right? So a GET request does not have a body. It has the headers, and it has the URL and everything. A POST request has the URL and headers and a body. And so, for example, if say you were wanting to make an Express backend that sent an email based on someone filling out a form, right? So someone has a form. It has to and from and subject and body. I would tend to use POST for that, and one of the reasons is because POST can take more information than GET can. So if you tried to send that form data through the URL, through the query parameters in the URL, if you had a long body of that email, there's a chance that you would exceed the length of an acceptable URL. And I don't remember what that is off the top of my head. Yeah, Debrina?
Is there a reason to use or to make a POST request if you don't have a database?
Yes.
What would be that? Like, what would be an example of that?
So this would be sending an email. So using a GET request query parameters to send this email information would be kind of clunky, because you're sending a ton. If somebody writes a 4-page email, you're sending just a ton of information. And again, you would probably run into this limit of how long it can be. Instead, if you use a POST request, you're putting all of that email data, so from, to, subject, body, into the body of this POST request, which can be arbitrarily long, right? And this doesn't have anything to do with the database. So on the back end, you could implement it as, when someone sends a POST request to this route, take it and send an email to somebody, right? And so we'll get more into when and why you would use POST, because there are some important differences of why you would use GET versus POST. But the important thing in terms of HTTP structure and anatomy is understanding that GET does not have a body and POST does, right? And so just to close this out, in this example where you have an HTML form, it's an email, to send an email, and it sends that stuff via POST request to your server, it's still a POST request. It's still a request. So and this is to what you were saying, Mira, which is you are sending information to the server, but it's all still part of a request. You're requesting that the server, in this case, send an email with the following specs, that it's from this person, it's to that person, right? And the server is going to send you a response. So depending on how we implement it, if we're implementing an API, the server might just send back a response that has, you know, a status code and says, okay. If we're implementing this as a web page, we would want to send back another web page that says, congratulations, your email has been sent. You know, and that's fully formed HTML, right? But that's the request response. HTTP is built on request response, request response, request response, right?
Okay. I'm getting it in like a communication type of conversation thing. Like you were saying, post has a body, so it's going to have more meat on it. Mm-hmm. More meat on the bone versus a get. Get's going to have, like you said, the URL, header, certain things, but it doesn't have a lot of substance like a post request would. Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. And then we understand if you make a request response. Okay, that helped me out understand what posts and get, why there's a difference. And, okay. And once you get into it, I'm pretty sure you're going to show us.
Yes, I will. I'm going to get some water, but Sabrina, what's your question?
You had said if you're implementing on an API, what is REST?
Yeah, I'll say that when I get back.
Like, I thought you always use this like they never really use it for like database. I think, I don't know.
What was your question?
When we're writing RESTful APIs, do we ever use Git
Yes.
to update your database? We use
Update, right. That's the convention.
Yeah, that's the convention.
Right, is that
But
post
like,
is to create and put is to update. But if you don't, it depends on how you want to fancy your handlers.
So we don't ever use delete.
Depends on how you want to set it up. You
Or,
could post and then make your post request delete something from your database,
right.
or you could set up a separate route that is delete,
Right.
handle it, so route it, handle that. So that's up to you.
What's the name of that restaurant, Miles?
House from house.
So Sabrina, you were asking what I was saying about an API versus, right. So, you know, two common use cases for making an Express server or particular routes in Express server are, I'm making an API, something that other code will interact with. And so that would be like a REST API. But you can also make just web pages. You know, you can make a server that serves web pages and that does some certain things based on which pages you go to and what information you're sending. And so the request response thing is, if you're building a REST API and somebody makes a request to send an email, you're going to want to send back something that a program will understand. So you could send back a response that says, you know, that's like a key value pair, and it says, you know, result, and then it says your email has been sent or something like that. But if you're building a web page, when someone types something in and clicks send on an email form, they want to see a page back that says, congratulations, your email has been sent, or maybe, sorry, we had an error, your email couldn't be sent. And so you're sending back as a response. You would be, in that case, actually redirecting someone to like a response web page. Right? Yeah.
Since you mentioned REST APIs, what other, can you define what RESTful API is, and what are the other APIs?
That's like a whole couple other lectures worth of stuff, and you know, happy to talk about it. REST. So the bottom line is, like, REST is this. How'd you describe it? Like a standard. It's like this set of conventions for how to make an API, and in the past, there was SOAP, and I guess I don't know that there's anything else that's super super common, but REST describes this set of conventions for how you create an API that people know what to do with, right? So lots more to look at there. Happy to talk about it. So let's actually build a post route. So here we are, and for this one, let's make a post route. So we're going to do app.post, and then what comes next? The route. Yep. And so for this one, let's do something. So we're doing these just kind of like simple operations. In this one, let's do one called weave, where they'll give us two arguments, two pieces of data, and we'll return them kind of weaved together. I'll show you what I mean by that. So we don't need any URL parameters in this because we're going to be taking in the information, the stuff that we're going to be working with as part of the post body, right? So the second argument to app.post is what? Yep. Callback function takes request and response. Good. So this is where Body Parser comes in. Who remembers from Wednesday or knows what Body Parser is and wants to give like a couple sentences about it?
So Body Parser is middleware, and what Body Parser does is it takes the request body that we're going to get from this post, and it's going to, because normally request body is undefined without that middleware, but as soon as you use Body Parser, we're able to read and interact with that data.
Great. Perfect. So Express does not have natively anything that will make the body of a post request available to you. What you need is some, well, I should say, make it available to you in a kind of easy to use format. What you use is middleware to take the data that's in the post request and interpret it. And what you're doing is you're parsing it. So in this case, in our server, we want to add this body parser middleware. So I'll do it down here. So we're going to go to the command line and lectures. So it's 27. Right. So we're going to do npm install body. It's body hyphen parser. So that's going to go ahead and install.
So you want to save that?
NPM by default does save. I think after, like, in some version, it switched from needing the -- save to NPM install just automatically saves. And we can check that by looking at the package JSON. And now in dependencies, we've got body parser. And so that's what save is doing. It's saying, add this as a dependency to my package JSON. So we've got body parser installed, and we got to require it. Body parser require body -parser. And then we've got to install it as middleware. So who knows how we do that? Yeah. app.use. Yep. Which is kind of expresses default. It's like its main function. When you're building an Express server, you're really running a bunch of commands that just tell Express to do a certain thing in certain conditions. So when you do an app.get, it's actually really an app.use that pertains only to this route. Does that make any sense what I'm saying?
Say that one more time for me.
Yeah. So Express's underlying structure is, you can think of basically everything as an app.use.
Okay.
And so in this case, for our get route here, you're really just saying app.use this callback function when we're at this route, right? When we're at this route and when it's a GET request. If that doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. That's a kind of underlying Express thing that is not super important at this point. But so we use app.use, and the syntax is like this: app.use body parser, and then we've got to specify what kind of thing we want to parse. So body parser can do JSON, and we call that as a function. And you can actually specify options. So when you're calling it, you can specify an object in here, and there's some kinds of options that you can do. But it's fine for us in this case, configured just as default. And so what this is saying is, Express app, when you get a request in, before you run this GET route, please use body parser to parse the body of any post requests. And the order matters here. So in an Express server, the order matters, whether app.use is up here or whether it's below. So if we put this body parser middleware after our post request, after our post route that we're defining, it would not get executed before we actually ran this post callback. Okay.
I have a question. So the app.use bodyParser.json, that would be run even when making the GET request.
No. So body parser knows to run itself only when it's a post request with a body or something with a body.
But I guess line 8 is executed even when I'm sending a GET request or repeat. Is it at least executed and it's like, okay, it's a GET request, I don't really need to do anything, or we don't touch that line at all?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. It gets executed every time. So under the hood, body parser is doing something like, so we'll say body parser. Under the hood, body parser is saying if the HTTP method is post or put or delete or any of these that have bodies, then take the body of that request, parse it, and set rec.body to the result. And so this is run for every request, but in GET requests, it just says, oh, this is a GET request. I know there's not a body to this, so no worries, don't need to do anything. And then Express continues on to the rest of the routes and stuff that you've said.
That's cool. So that runs every time. So you can have a series of different routes
Mm-hmm.
underneath it, and that'll apply to all of them.
Say that again.
Like if you had multiple app.get requests
Mm-hmm.
down there, and then a post in the middle, and a couple more gets, no matter what, you only need that one app.use bodyParser.json line to check all those. It's running. I think I got it.
Yeah, yeah, and this is the beauty of middleware. So this this is kind of classic middleware. You're putting something in the middle of when the request comes in and when you have a route that sends a response. And that thing in the middle in this case is something that takes a body and parses it into something usable for us. Because when we get when we get a JSON body, we want to be able to interact with it basically as a JavaScript object. So we want to be able to, and we'll do this in our post route. If someone has given us JSON that has a key A and a key B, and each one of those keys has a value, we want to be able to just say, what is it?
Give me those values.
Yeah, just give me those values. And in particular, it's, yeah, so it's rec.body.a, rec.body.b. That would be really convenient if we could interact with it that way, and that's what Body Parser gives us, is the ability to, it parses the JSON text, really, into a JSON object that we can interact with. Cool? So Body Parser is, what's that?
Sorry, I was going to ask a real quick question about the Body Parser. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Just as far as I'm still confused about how to choose which Body Parser to use, like which module are, so like there's JSON, there's text, there's URL encoded. When we do the app.use bodyparser.json, how do we choose which, does that make sense? Like, why are we choosing JSON versus URL encoded or versus text?
Yeah, great question. So in this case, we're choosing JSON because we're going to be asking whoever is sending us requests to send the body as JSON. Okay. So we're making a choice in designing our API here, our routes, that we're saying send us JSON in the body of this request. And Stephanie is asking what other things, like when do you use the other body parser types? So body parser can also do form data. So form data that's sent in the body of a post request, like we were talking about earlier, like that email. If we wrote a route that takes and sends an email, that would be app.use, and it's bodyparser.url encoded. And then this one, you specify this parameter, which is extended false. And if you're going to ask me why we specify that particular thing, I don't actually know. I don't remember off the top of my head why that's a good default. So what this is saying is, in this case, so what's really going on here under the hood is when this body parser middleware is run, it's saying if the content type of the request, this post request, if the content type is JSON, I'll parse it as JSON. But it's smart enough to know that if the content type, which again is specified in the header, if the content type is something else, it's not going to touch it. And so here, we're adding another body parser middleware that instead of looking for the content type JSON, it's looking for the content type X-URL encoded something something something. But it's the type that is pertains to like a URL HTML form data. Does that make sense? Stephanie, does that cover it? Cool. So we don't need this just yet, but we'll kind of keep it around. So here in our route now that we have Body Parser, the Body Parser middleware, now we can access the data, the JSON that's sent in. And so what we want is when someone sends us, for this route, we want someone to send us a JSON object that's like this. A equals 5 and B equals dog. So that'd be in quotes. And just to be ultra clear, this is cat. So A is something, B is something. And so the way that we're going to access that is by doing const A equals rec.body.a. And const B equals rec.body.b. Right? Turns out there's that easier syntax that we know how to use now, destructuring. Who knows how to get those values using destructuring syntax?
Using what?
Destructuring syntax.
Put the curly braces on the left side equal.
Curly braces on the left side of the equal.
The variable name.
Variable name.
You're putting in it has to match. Name.
Yep.
On the other side.
Yep. So this is destructuring syntax. And you can tell because it's got these curly braces on the left side of the equals. And this is functionally the same as this up here. So what you're saying is, I want you to create two variables, A and B, and I want you to assign them whatever is in rec.body.a in the case of A, and rec.body.b in the case of B. So important syntax to know. So we'll do it that way. We're almost out of time, but let's see if we can get this post route sending something. So let's do a response. And with that response, thanks, Spencer. With that response, why don't we just send back a string that is, oh man, that's A, and then B, and then A, and then B. So this is the weave. A, B, A, B. Right? So let's see if this, this works, and then we'll wrap up for today. So our route is /weave, and where does it go? Oh, post request. And body is going to be application JSON. And so here we're going to send A is dog, and B is cat. And in the headers, we've got content type application JSON. So Postman knows to set that content type when we have set this way, that the form body, or that post body is application JSON. So if we send this over, the response that we get is dog, cat, dog, cat. Huzzah, it works. Folks get how that worked?
Did I say the code?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, shit.
You just cut off everybody.
Well, everybody's still on. I just stopped screen sharing. Should be back. So here's the code. So at the route weave, we have this callback, just like any of our other routes. We get A and B from the request.body. And this is available to us because we have Body Parser. If we went up here and we commented this out, and then NodeMon restarts the server, and we try to make this request again, we're going to get this error, cannot match against undefined or null. What this is telling us is there is no such thing as rec.body.a or rec.body.b. because rec.body has not been assigned anything because we don't have a middleware to assign it.
curious to see what happens if you don't specify the type of the request you're sending in. From Postman, if you don't specify that it's a JSON.
So in Postman, if you don't specify the content type as JSON, my guess is that it's not going to know what to do. It's not going to parse it, right? So if we turn off that, yeah. So undefined, 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 undefined. Rec.body.a is just not it's not defined to be anything. But again, if we send the content type again, now Body Parser knows to run, and we get .cat. Pretty good. So we'll pick this up on Monday. Let's just do more on Monday.
No, I love this. I love seeing how it's supposed to work. This is great.
Good. So this is our post route. And this code, I'll post this code when I send out the video.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Thank you, Justin.